What is up, everyone? Good energy? You like that?
Good energy.
Good start. Cool.
Good way to start it.
In the last video, you guys saw we assembled our 2JZ. Right? It's obviously there's a lot more that needs to go on this thing, but it is officially a long block. It's sealed up, and the most important thing about it is we could finally start test fitting this thing in the car. Dun dun dun. It's gonna be out a lot of times, but this is the first time we're gonna test it, and today we're gonna figure out what we need to still cut, modify, and adapt to the chassis to make this all work. So we got a lot of talking to do. Let's get to it. So you guys saw in the last video, Spoon modified the factory front subframe to convert it into a front rack setup. So usually with the 240, the rack is in the rear, but with this kit, we move the rack to the front of the subframe, and it utilizes a E46 BMW steering rack. This in itself will go along with all the suspension and everything. We'll talk about it later on, but for now, we just have this set up here so we could figure out where the engine's gonna sit. With that, allows us to run a rear sump pan on our 2JZ, which we talked about in the last video, how going dry sump is always a good answer, but with the rear sump pans, we should have no oiling issues, nothing I even need to stress about. So utilizing a factory pan is gonna keep things a lot simpler and bring the cost down tremendously. But to start off, we have to figure out how we're gonna actually mount this thing to our chassis, right? And there's a couple different ways to do it. We can do it streetcar style, where we have our engine mounts and they mount to our factory subframe, and boom. You guys have seen it a million times before. Or we can go with a more motorsports, or more, I'll consider it more drag race style, and use a face plate on the engine. That's a big plate that bolts to the front of the engine and then bolts to the frame rails. Or we can kind of split the difference, and that's, well, exactly what we're doing. So right here, we have a custom piece made by our buddy Darren McNamara down at Group D in Ireland. Everyone knows to be a mad scientist of cars, and well, he has a solution that I think will work very, very well for us. So what we have here is new mounts off the side of the block, like we'll say the streetcar style. But instead of mounting the mounts to the factory subframe, we will actually be mounting them on the factory S chassis rail. Darren down at Group D made us these plates that will actually weld to our factory S chassis rail, and our engine will bolt straight to it. So now we are able to take all of the load off the subframe, and the best part about it, now we can completely swap our front subframe, service any of it without actually having to support the engine, since the weight will be on the rails. It makes it extremely serviceable, and it gives it a nice sturdy place for the engine to mount directly to the chassis. It comes to so many custom aftermarket pieces, it gets a little tricky to use kind of, we'll call this off-the-shelf pieces, but this is something that Darren has done multiple times with the same engine, the same chassis, with basically the exact same drivetrain that we're using. So I'm very confident out of the box this will do us pretty good, but we're not gonna know until we won't start testing things up. So for now, let's get these things bolted up on our engine. Just do the, ready for it? And it's apparent that I need to order hardware. But they fit great. Look how beefy these things are. I'm happy it's not a solid bushing, it's a rubber bushing. So now this will position on the rail, and then we'll weld this bracket to the rail itself. It's cool, right? Look at that. Look at that. That's a whole ass engine. When fitting an engine in a car, there's a lot of limitations, and well, there's a lot of things to account for. We have to worry about the position of the engine in every direction, up, down, left, right, back, forward, the angle, everything. First, and probably our biggest limitation, is going to be where our subframe lands, right? We have to clear our oil pan on the subframe. We have to clear the firewall of the engine in the transmission. And honestly, those are gonna be our two biggest ones here. The lower we can get the engine, the better, right? A lower center of gravity is already better. And of course, the farther we can put it back, it helps with the weight balance, and we can't complain. But of course, we have this to worry about, and we have this to worry about. So for now, let's just start with a good dry mock of just the engine and go from there. And yes, I need to buy a new engine crane. This thing's hurt. The body count on this engine crane is ridiculous. Did we clear the subframe yet? We have to cut more. You're gonna see a lot of this. Okay. Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay, that gets tight with the rear sump quick. All right, so right now we're basically smushed between the firewall and the subframe, but luckily there is more material we can take off the subframe to help relieve that. So we can get the engine a little bit lower because it actually has to go down lower. So now that we dropped the subframe, the engine mounts are actually sitting really nice on the rails. That's how low it's gonna go. Since these are off-the-shelf mounts, we kind of are going with the height that Darren has made them for. It actually looks like a really good position. The engine sits nice and low. Right, that's where it's gonna end up sitting. Yeah, it's nice and low. It's quite low. All right, now our job is, well, make everything else around it fit. Questions last. That's not good. The new rack support for the front rack hits the front of the oil pan pretty aggressively. If only this thing was right-hand drive, because then it would clear magically on this side. So, what makes this really tricky is the fact that though it's called a rear sump pan, I'd consider this more of a mid sump because the oil pan is like in the middle of the engine versus it really being all the way back. Dude, it is so tight right now. All right, we're in there. It fits, but it's tight. So we'll give it a little shake. You can hear it. Now this is one of those moments where a dry sump might be kind of nice. It's tight. It's really tight, right? We're tight between the subframe and the oil pan and the firewall, but we do have room. Now, the biggest limitation now is going to find out where the trans wants to sit. So, before we make any major moves, we have to get the trans on this thing and start fitting up the entire drivetrain. It might look a little chaotic, but we are using two aftermarket components that weren't made for each other, and we're trying to make it work, right? These mounts are usually made for a front sump with a normal rack in the rear, and it fits fine, or even with a dry sump setup. And of course, the front rack E46 steering setup is pretty new, and we're trying to figure out how to make this all work together. It might look chaotic, but we're definitely guinea pigs on this one. This is going to go in and out many times. For how small this thing is, it's quite heavy. Look at that. GSR dog box G-force, baby. We were super tempted to go with the sequential, and there's a long reasons of why we didn't, but it's really nice with the GSR. It is such a small package compared to the rest that fitting this thing won't be as big of a nightmare.
Sequential guy.
I mean, a sequential will be incredible. Like
Sequential guy, something about.
Dude, when I got to drive Gary's car in Ireland,
Man's mission.
Just dun dun dun, and like the downshifts between drifts, you could like, oh, it doesn't disrupt the car. It's amazing. But the price difference and the serviceability difference between the two transmissions with the G-force or sequential is astronomical. So of course, to bolt the transmission to the JZ, we have a quick time bell housing. Look at this. Jesus, this thing's
gnarly.
It's surprisingly heavy. I mean, the whole thing is it's supposed to be safe enough that your clutch can explode and not go through the tunnel in your leg, so it makes sense why it's so beefy. All right, since this is all just a dry mock, of course we're not gonna put the clutch in, the throw-out bearing, measure all the tolerance, everything. We literally just have to have the whole main thing bolted together, so we are just shoving this thing on right now. It's funny because the bell housing and the tram's like the first thing to show up. We got it from Drift HQ. Great pricing, in stock. Happy we finally got to pull it out. Okay.
Heavy baby.
My baby's a lot lighter than this, I'll tell you that. This was a bad technique here. Well, it's pretty wild to see this thing actually hooked up because it just makes it feel real. I mean, it's been just like months of just part collecting and everything, and it's like wild to see it somewhat come together. I mean, we have so much setup to do just to get this all together and everything, but we're making progress, and that's all that matters. So now the drivetrains together, we're gonna have to do even more clearancing because as of right now, we have a stock trans tunnel, right? It is completely stock, and of course, it is way too small to rock this trans tunnel. We gotta do some more cutting and make it fit, and then we're gonna make it all pretty afterwards. But for now, the name of the game is just make this thing fit, and then we'll worry about what it looks like later. Cut first, ask questions last. Spoon's favorite tool. Yeah, we're gonna have to cut the whole top of the trans tunnel off. We knew it, we expected it. This poor chassis doesn't even know what it has coming. Of course, we're gonna be cutting out a lot just to make this more serviceable, but for now, we're just trying to find out limitations, and really, the starter hump is our only main limitation right here. We actually have a surprising amount of room up top and stuff. Well, until we push it back to where it's actually supposed to sit. We're gonna start small and work our way up from there.
Not big enough, but it'll do.
All right, so of course the top of the transmission is hitting the top of the trans tunnel like we anticipated, so we're just gonna get after it and, well, make some more room. Happen. Hell yeah. God darn.
Alright. Gotta have to cut some more.
More cutting? Is it centered right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically it right there. It's close, but I don't see it touching. So we got it in a position that we're super happy with. Now, huge shout out to Darren for getting us these mounts because this saved us so much time. Like an insane amount of fabrication and positioning. Right now, we have it at a really good height that we're happy with. And since it's the perfect width of the frame rail, we didn't have to really do any modification like that. All we had to do was basically make sure it's engine position, front and back. And then of course, we have to make sure that this thing is straight lined with the chassis, right? Since the diff is in the center of the car, we need to make sure the center of the drivetrain follows that trend. So we got this handy tool. So we're able to throw a laser down this dead center of the car, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna match it down the dead center of the transmission. So we know that it's in line with the differential, theoretically, and dead center to the car. Darren's off-the-shelf mounts, like look at it. You could tell the engine is perfectly centered with the car, which is amazing. So now we can make sure that our engine is positioned correctly in this orientation. You see what I'm talking about? And if you're worried about the angle of the engine, since we don't have a diff in, we really can't measure for pinion angle right now. So we have it roughly at what we think the angle is gonna be, so it'll get us close enough to actually be able to tack our mounts up. So you ready to put some tacks on there? Nice. Let's plug the ECU in and get this thing started.
Think we'll still make the LZ World Tour?
Yeah, we gotta leave for, California in like 3 days ago. So we got this. If anyone can do it, I think we got it.
Truck could be centered with the Bellhausen marker.
Yeah, it's good. I'm like really impressed for like an off-the-shelf, like we'll call it off-the-shelf pair of engine mounts. The line is this centered in the car. So think how much discrepancies are in chassis alone, Right. So the engine's in and it feels absolutely amazing. Like it looks so good in here. Like it makes my heart so happy. It's like this 1% step towards everything, but it's a huge one. The Group D mounts made our life so much easier, and we do have to get these things fully welded in, but I don't want to do so until we actually have the whole drivetrain tacked into place, right? So we have to wait till the diff comes in, which actually should show up this week. We already have a custom subframe by MA to get that quick change in there. And then from there, we can make the trans mount. But I was under the car yesterday and the trans mount was gonna be a lot easier than I thought. I mean, look at this real quick. Give me a second. So check this thing out. We're really lucky because the bottom of the transmission is just flat, right? And it should be slightly above the floor pan, which gives us plenty of room to make a mount. And it's honestly just gonna be almost a straight bar. We're gonna make a new mount on the floor pan, probably in this area, and we'll be able to just run a straight mount, and our life should be really easy. So making the trans mount is gonna be a very quick ordeal. All we have to do is get the diff in so we can make sure we have the angle of our transmission at the correct angle to match the pinion angle of the diff, so our drive shaft is happy. So that actually eases my soul quite a bit.
I don't think you got the engine far enough back.
Oh, shut up. Right, so by rules, we can't go farther, we can't go behind the firewall, right? But we can go very, very, very close to it and then make room around it, right? So we are able to modify the firewall. We just can't let the engine go back behind the original placement of it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we have the thing crammed against the firewall now, and then we will make room around it because we have to run stuff behind the engine, right? And right now we really can't do so. But that being said, we have a lot more cutting to do because right now we have it just cut up to allow us to fit it. Right, we have this giant hole. And at first I was playing it safe. I've seen a lot of guys who will keep the factory sides of the tunnel and just make a new top. But of course that will make serviceability very difficult, and we need serviceability. So we will be getting a whole new trans tunnel. We're gonna make it honestly huge. It's gonna be really big. We have to make sure I have room to fit in the car, but the more area we have around the transmission and the engine makes it easier to pull out when we inevitably have to change gears in this thing, because I'm gonna misshift and blow apart the gear. Everyone does
Inevitably.
it. Inevitably, everyone does it.
Yeah, everyone who builds these cars has to make it serviceable. I mean, like,
exactly. And that's the best part about this transmission, is the fact that we were able to pull it out and replace gears in less than 2 hours.
Yeah. This hole where it goes back, like that's gonna have to go so much further back so that you can pull the tranny just by itself.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're gonna end up cutting out like a bunch. So we'll be able to actually get our hands in there, get things behind the engine, hopefully actually run some stuff through the trans tunnel with all that room. And the name of the game here is fix it fast, fix it easy, right? Right, Spoon?
Thumbs up by Spoon.
That's a good thing.
all smiles from that guy.
Someone go feed Spoon. Obviously we had to cut the subframe up quite a bit to fit our rear sump pan. But luckily, since the weight and the torque of the engine is now coming off the subframe and going on the frame rails, really what we have here is something that's just gonna be supporting the rack and the abuse of the suspension, of the steering, we'll say. So we just gotta, it won't necessarily be taking as much abuse as it would if obviously the engine was mounted to it. So Spoon is going through, reinforcing it in every bit that he can. There's still plenty to be done. Spoon is so over it. Spending it's hard, right? Because we're keeping the factory stuff, and you know, that causes some limitations, but it's what we're working with and we're gonna make it happen. So I'm stoked that we'll be able to run the E46 rack, and now that it's front rack, we'll be able to actually pull the rack out very easily without the engine being in the way like the S chassis, where it's a rear rack and there's kind of a pain in the butt. So it's all adding up, we're good. It is a huge win that we're actually able to fit this engine where we want it with this oil pan and not have to go dry sump. So it makes things tight, but it makes things possible, which is huge. Right, B? That is huge.
These are the rules though. Every car in FD has the factory subframe mounting to the chassis, every single car.
It's wild. You're basically like utilizing this much factory stuff.
Even like Ryan Turek's Corolla, they like got a subframe from Europe for an all-wheel drive Corolla before the Yaris GR existed, and like that's what's in there.
Huge step in the right direction. We have a lot of stuff lined up now, and now the ball is rolling, and I couldn't be more excited for it. So, but for now, we're out of time for today. So you guys know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned. Wow, I've been doing this for 6 years already. Stay tuned for more content, and we'll see you guys very shortly.